What's up, guys? This is Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with the overall market and talk about some very big news that's coming out that's going to cause a lot of volatility by tomorrow. I'm also going to talk about what Jerome Powell just said that's very important, how this is affecting the markets alongside NIO. Just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I'm saying as financial advice. Anyways, NIO is technically looking a lot more bullish as long as we don't lose the $7 area. We're now favoring an attempt to go back up to that 7.4 plus zone, looking more bullish to me. However, I do want to talk about a couple of things. Very soon, we have President Trump meeting up with Xi Jinping of China. The president of China and President Trump will be meeting up in South Korea. And this is going to be happening in not too long from now. I think around 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time is when the meeting starts. And that's going to be very, very impactful, especially if there is some kind of big deal that ends up coming out. So make sure you guys are ready for this. So what do I think is going to happen as time goes on? Let's actually break this down. And if anything, I think it's very important to talk about what's happening with the Fed. So Jerome Powell, he basically gave his speech and answered a lot of questions. And he said some things that caused the market to dip, but then it bounced again because much of what he said was not necessarily more bearish. I'd say more of what he said was more bullish. I'm going to explain exactly why that is. So Jerome Powell was giving his same typical speech. The market was just flat. And then he mentioned that, look, because of all this data that's being delayed and due to some uncertainties when it comes to unemployment, the Fed cannot promise another cut in December. He made that very clear. So the market had almost fully priced in a cut in December. Now the odds of it went down quite a bit to 67%. So we went from like 90 something percent to 67%. And this is why the market ended up dipping, because Jerome Powell is telling us, look, we can't make promises about another cut in December. Now, that was like, I would say, like the more bearish thing that Jerome Powell said, but then he said other things that were more bullish, because he mentioned that when it comes to the labor market, it's been a little bit more on the stable side. It's not doing too poorly. And that the inflationary numbers are not too bad, although there's a slight upside risk for like the shorter term. The longer term still is very much under control and the numbers are not too bad. So because of the fact that that's the case, the Fed is entering a phase where they could start to ease up on policy. And Jerome Powell did imply this, right? What's going to happen is we're going to see the Fed start to buy up more treasury bonds. And the reason is because this is going to, in turn, be an indirect way for them to stimulate the economy. Why are they doing that? Because you have to consider that they're trying to just kind of like protect the labor market, essentially. Because we're in a position where there is risk, at least for the economy. There is a risk of some kind of like downturn, as a lot of people are talking about. There is a risk of higher unemployment. Although the numbers are not as bad as they may become, Jerome Powell and the Fed are trying to be very careful. So in turn, they're not necessarily like turning the money printer on full blast, but in the upcoming months, what the Fed is going to do is they're going to be transitioning on policy, right? We were in this phase of quantitative tightening, and now we're slowly easing up more and more and more. And we're entering another economy where borrowing money is going to get cheaper slowly, at least for now. So it is possible to get another cut in December, and very likely we will, in my opinion, although the Fed has kind of like instilled less confidence because of the uncertainty. But overall, what is bullish is that the Fed is going to be once again adjusting policies and buying up more of these bonds, which will once again help to stimulate the economy simultaneously. Jerome Powell also was he was answering lots of questions about AI and how things are going, and he was just being very, very unbiased about it, being very careful with not giving away way too much information. And much of what he said is very similar to before. But the main thing to remember is that once again, the Fed is easing up on policy, at least indirectly, and they are once again going to stimulate things indirectly, which is still a little bit more bullish for the markets. Yes, the shorter term, the thing he said was a little bit more bearish, with us not being as confident about getting another cut in December, but most of what he said was still more bullish, which is why the market kind of like dipped. Then it bounced, and we saw the QQQ and SPY close in the green even after Jerome Powell was speaking. So I'd say it's like 50-50. We kind of dipped and bounced with Jerome Powell overall, and the market may even try to hold up thanks to Powell. But there's two more factors affecting the markets, and President Trump will be another one. I'll talk about that in just a second. So number one, the second thing that came out is big tech earnings. Okay, Meta, Microsoft, and Alphabet / Google just announced their earnings. Tomorrow we also have like Amazon, Apple, and Coinbase. For today, what happened? Meta is down quite a bit because they missed on their EPS. and because of other factors, we saw the share price actually drop quite a bit. Not the best of news for them. That's why the share price is down. Microsoft did very, very well, beating expectations and raising their guidance. The share price is up, especially with operating income doing well, and they have a strong guidance as well. Like I said, so they did decent overall, not too bad. However, I think the share price ended up dipping later on because a lot of this was already priced in as it was already pumping. So they did well, right? It was decent earnings from what I'm looking at, but the share price is still kind of flat or a little bit in the red. And then Alphabet, this is the one that's up because they had good growth, good revenue growth overall and such. So one of the big tech stocks is in the green, the other one is in the red, and then the last one is like kind of flat, somewhat in the red. That's why the market's kind of like dipping in the after hours because of big tech. Seeing 2 out of 3 big tech stocks are somewhat in the red. One of them is in the green. So that's the second factor affecting the markets, the big tech companies. That's why we're kind of like red right now. However, there's one more factor that could change everything. That's going to be, I think it's going to have a bigger effect on the markets. That's President Trump. President Trump said that we already have a trade deal with South Korea. We did a lot of things. We reached a deal. It was a great session, according to him. And they came to a conclusion on a lot of different items. So President Trump is talking about the South Korean deal that was signed. And then today, okay, at 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, that's the time that President Trump will be meeting up with Xi Jinping in South Korea. Over there, it's going to be like 11 o'clock a.m. or something like that in South Korea. He will be meeting up with Xi Jinping. And he said the meeting may go on for 3 or 4 hours. They're going to be talking about the rare earth concessions. They're going to be talking about the soybean sales, their trade, the tariffs. Everything is going to be discussed. And if anything, President Trump said he's very optimistic that there's going to be a deal. He thinks it's going to be a fantastic deal for both sides and things are going to be a-okay. So the two of the most powerful men in the world from the two largest economies on the planet are going to be meeting up and making a deal. This is going to be affecting a lot of different companies, all kinds of different companies all over the world, the Chinese stocks, the American stocks, and the list goes on. President Trump also mentioned that he's going to be talking about NVIDIA's Blackwell AI chips, and he's going to be talking about the import restrictions on NVIDIA. So there's going to be more negotiations involving semiconductors. So what does this mean? There is uncertainty. If the market does not get a great deal, if the big tech companies just continue to dump and it doesn't really help us, downside is a possibility. If we get a good deal, we could be looking for a nice bounce in the markets, and I do hope that's going to be the case. NIO looks more bullish, technically speaking. We're favoring 7.5. I think there is some upside potential. Now on SPY, this is a different story. It depends on what kind of reaction we get. We're only down 0.13%. If we end up losing 682, look for that gap fill down below. As long as we hold 682, we could be looking for a bounce and a continuation higher if we get a good deal involving China. And this could be a trap for a lot of the bears. This might actually try to pump again. I do lean a bit more in favor of that, but that's under the assumption that we get a good deal. So hopefully we get a bounce on SPY. On the QQQ, same thing. If we end up losing essentially 630, we're looking for a dump back down, especially as we have a gap at 617. I think there's another gap down here at 628. Are we going to dump and start filling some of these gaps, especially if 630 fails us? Or do we bounce near 630 and continue to break out for 636? It's possible we bounce, so we'll see how it goes. If we get a good deal, there could be a nice bounce coming. On the IW, we're making lower highs. We're going to see if we get back above 248. If not, we could be dipping more. This is at risk of dipping unless we reclaim 248, but it depends on the China deal if we get something really good. ES is currently above 6,900 right now. That's a good sign. If we hold this, we could be looking for a big bounce. This could be a trap for the bears. If we lose 6,900, there is going to be a risk of us dipping to 6,840. So let's see if we bounce or not. NQ is holding up nicely above 26,200. If we end up losing, however, 25,994, which is basically around 26,000, then we could be dipping more. As of right now, we're trying to bounce. Bitcoin dipped and now it's trying to bounce. I want to see it reclaim 112,000. If so, we're looking for 114,000. Tesla's holding up nicely. As long as we don't lose 455, we could be retesting 465. Nvidia is dipping. We're going to see if President Trump announces anything involving the Blackwell chips. This could still bounce, guys. Don't be too bearish yet. Let's see what happens tomorrow. If we don't hold 202, though, this could be dipping to 200 and 195. If we break past 207, we're looking for a bounce. We're going to see if we rebound for 207 plus. On Apple, we're looking more bullish. As long as we don't lose 266, we could be looking for a attempt for 272.5. On AMD, We're more bullish as long as we don't lose 254. We're going to be favoring 265 plus. Coinbase, if we end up losing 347, we're going to be dumping a lot more. If we hold this, we're looking for a big bounce for the 350s. Amazon has support right here at 226, so we're going to see if we bounce. If we don't, there's a gap to fill down here. If we hold this, we're looking for a really big bounce. Meta, however, is looking very bearish. We came back down, unfortunately, looking kind of weak with the miss in EPS. Hopefully, it tries to base right here, though, near support at 685. Hopefully, it tries to bounce, but overall, it's still weak. Google's in the opposite direction, is currently nearing 300, still looks more bullish. Microsoft dipped and now is trying to bounce. Earnings were not too bad. It's only down 1%. Hopefully, we try to hold 532 to bounce up to 540. And that's pretty much it for now. So hopefully we get some good reports and NIO tries to bounce as well. I think NIO is going to push for 7.5. Hopefully we get a good deal involving the US and China from President Trump and President Xi Jinping. So we'll see how it goes. So far, things are looking very optimistic according to President Trump. We'll see how it goes. If we get a big deal, the market could still bounce. If we get what we want to hear, we'll see how it goes. Thank you for listening and peace out.